Hey everybody, Mr. Moblin coming back at you with another APUSH video. This is our third video in the series focusing in on topic 6.13, which is Gilded Age politics. Now, last time we were here, we were talking about how Grover Cleveland is going to overcome a pretty noticeable sex scandal to become the first elected Democrat president since 1856. Now, Cleveland comes in under this, sense of, auspice that, he is an honest political leader. He believes in slim, trim governments. And that really is going to, really for the most part be true during his presidency, especially his first term. Grover Cleveland, even though he's a Democrat, and today we don't think of Democrats today as small government, folks. Back then, this is still, a time period of where both parties, had some degree of supporting laissez-faire actions. Both were very laissez-faire by today's standards. So we're not quite at the Democrat Party that we kind of know it today as an economically liberal party. It's still pretty economically conservative. And so, Cleveland is going to be, the veto president. He is not going to be afraid to veto all sorts of bills, especially those that are going to have anything to really do with expanding the federal government in any kind of meaningful way. So, I will say this, Cleveland was kind of an equal opportunity vetoer. It didn't matter if they were Democrat bills, Republican bills, bills to help the poor, bills to help the wealthy industrialists, bills to help Civil War veterans with their pensions. All those things, Cleveland is going to be, attempting to veto. And that's going to come with some criticism, when he's going up against, what people want in terms of special interests. And, Grover, Grover Cleveland describing himself as, the guy, with, a public trust. He's going to make some political enemies on some important issues. And one of the big issues was the tariff. The tariff had always been a hot potato issue throughout the 19th century, and it still continued during this time period. And the question becomes, to what degree should the federal government be placing tariffs on foreign goods to actively protect American businesses? Obviously, wealthy industrialists of the time, still wanted this. This would make them more competitive here at home. But since the beginning, consumers don't like tariffs. Why? Because as soon as you place a tariff on a good, not only does that foreign good go up, but so does the cost of that domestic good, because that domestic company is trying to maximize their profits. So, there's always been that issue. But what we have noticed by the 1880s is that the tariff has become a larger and larger source of revenue for the federal government. Take a look at this stat. In 1885, you saw tariffs account for $100 million in federal budgetary surplus. That means that the federal government was bringing in $100 million more than what it was spending out. And that's in 1885 dollars. So, you're talking about what would be close to, about $1 billion today. Now, once again, in our modern, budget, $1 billion is really hardly anything. But still, though, this is a lot of money back then. And so it did raise some questions with mugwumps and even with President Cleveland, the idea of, why has the federal government got all this money to play with? What is this a sign of? And for these folks, it was a sign that the federal government was taxing people too much, that it would allow the federal government to waste more money. And that was something that Cleveland and, mugwumps were opposed to. And so the idea being is, cut the tariffs, help consumers, keep the federal government's, trough dry, if you will. In other words, give it less money for the federal piggy, so to speak, to have fun with. But note, this is going to come at a little bit of a political cost, because you're talking about some of the most wealthy and powerful people in opposition to, such policies. As you can see here, this issue is going to become probably the single biggest issue in the upcoming 1888 election. What do you do with tariffs? What do you do with revenue for the federal government? What do you do with Civil War pensions? It's basically, how big of a government do you want? How much money do you want this federal government to have access to? And when we see the 1888 matchup, you see here Grover Cleveland, once again running for a second term and going up against Indiana Governor Benjamin Harrison. And that last name Harrison should probably ring a bell. You might remember William Henry Harrison, the first Whig president, and still to this day the president with the shortest term in office at right around 1 month. This is one of William Henry Harrison's grandsons. So Ben Harrison, grandson of former president and war hero William Henry Harrison. Ben Harrison also, served as an officer in the Civil War. Now, once again, a lot of this is going to be tied to the economy. Who's going to be coming out in support of a bigger tariff? Who's going to be coming out in support of a lower tariff? This political cartoon you can kind of see here, it's entitled Coming Out for Harrison, but as you can see here, workers that, would be voting for Harrison, the Republican, seem to be coerced by business owners, business managers, industrialists that are pretty much threatening them, with their jobs. The idea being is, they are, scaring the workers, basically saying in 1888, if that Grover Cleveland wins again and he gets a second term, he's going to destroy the economy, and then we're going to have to lay you off, and then your family's going to starve, and you're going to be homeless, and you don't want that to happen, so you better be voting for Ben Harrison. So there's going to be this idea of using scare tactics by business owners to try to coerce the urban working class to come out and vote for Ben Harrison. Now, critics of Ben Harrison are going to, mock his limited federal government experience, and they're also going to mock his height. A lot of times he would be called Little Ben because he was, shorter statured. But here's what comes out in the 1888 election. Despite, being, maligned as Little Ben, Ben Harrison's going to come out and win in this election. Once again, it's going to be another one of these close elections in terms of a popular vote total. Very close. All these are pretty close races. And once again, you can kind of see, that divide line between the North and the South. Once again, Republicans waving that bloody shirt from the previous generation's Civil War. The South solidly committed to the Democrats. But once again, big swing state like New York is going to be pivotal. And New York coming out for Harrison in 1888 over home state boy Grover Cleveland is going to prove pivotal. So Ben Harrison will defeat Grover Cleveland in the 1888 election. Now, the question is, what will happen? What's going to happen with, the budget surplus? What's going to happen with tariffs and things like that? Well, as you would expect, the Harrison administration is going to go whole hog on tariffs, raising tariffs, looking out to protect American factory owners and businesses. And when it comes down to spending money liberally on Civil War pensions. And so you can see this little political cartoon mocking President Harrison, not only in his height, but also mocking his seeming willingness to waste government money, waste a government surplus, and creating what was dubbed the first billion-dollar Congress. In other words, the first time that we saw a federal budget topping out at $1 billion. So, opponents of big government are certainly going to have a lot to, have problems with regards to Ben Harrison. Now, something else that we need to keep in mind is that, as we've kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, that this is a time where the federal government is still remarkably small than what it would be today. And that's fine, but, we are starting to see some of the negative effects of industrialization starting to kind of, be apparent. Questions about, manipulative and corrupt business practices, bribing of government officials, unfair business tactics to drive out competition to create monopolies and trusts. So, all of these things are going to be something that's going to be driving some of what's going to be happening. Now, we mentioned in class, we've already talked about the Interstate Commerce Act, which creates the Interstate Commerce Commission, which is mostly going to be regulating railroads at the time, and the Sherman Antitrust Act to ban monopolies. But we also mentioned that those two laws are going to be filled with loopholes and not really effective in terms of trying to regulate railroads and outlaw monopolies, but it does lay a foundation. We do see the McKinley tariff, once again, being a raise in the tariffs. This is William McKinley, future president of the United States. And once again, this is a very typical pro-business owner, Republican mindset. But note, this is going to come into contrast to some degree with what people are wanting. And there is this burgeoning, what's going to be called populist movement that's starting to kind of take over in the West and parts of the South. And so we're starting to see more of a battle between rich and poor and the interests of wealthy business owners versus the interests of farmers and working class people. So the Republicans will take a hit in Congress in the 1890 midterm elections. And then that brings us to the 1892 presidential election, which is going to be a rematch of the 1888 election and will mark Grover Cleveland being nominated by the Democrats in 3 straight presidential races, 1884, 1888, and 1892. And Cleveland's going to try to attempt to do something that no president had ever done before, try to win 2 non-consecutive terms. Now, as you can see here, many of the same issues will be, focused on. The tariff, the size of government regulation and its responsibilities and things like that. And take a look here. Harrison is going to get trounced, relatively speaking, for the time period by Grover Cleveland. Once again, New York becomes a key swing state, and you're going to see Democrats winning in places they don't normally win, like, say, Wisconsin and Illinois. So Cleveland's going to be able to do it. Cleveland's going to come back and earn a second non-consecutive term. And so the question then becomes, will the 1890s version of Grover Cleveland continue with the 1880s version of Grover Cleveland? Are we going to see a reduction in tariffs? Are we going to see a streamlining of the federal government? We'll see what happens. But I will give you a little bit of a teaser. It's not going to go very well. Almost as soon as Cleveland takes office, economic calamity is going to set in. The Panic of 1893 is basically going to be the worst depression America is going to face short of the Great Depression. And this just, was going to be defining Cleveland's second term. And the question becomes, how does Cleveland respond? This is a time of unprecedented economic need, and we're going to be talking later on about a desire by, working class people for active government to help. Well, Cleveland, as we're going to see, is not going to be willing to budge on his principles of small government and a necessity to help the working class. He's going to defend the gold standard, which at a time, and we'll talk more later on about, the role of currency in all this, but the basic gist of it is that maintaining the gold standard helps maintain the high value of U.S. currency, which certainly helps bankers and it helps business owners. If you're working class and you're a debtor, this is really bad news. In other words, no help from inflation at a time where you are desperate. We've already talked about how Cleveland's going to be willing to use the government's power and resources to shut down the Pullman strike in 1894. Wilson's going to refuse to go trying to raise the tariffs with the Wilson-Gorman Act. He's going to repeal the Sherman-Silver Purchase Act, which would have inflated the currency. So you can see here, in all of these different manifestations, you're going to be seeing Grover Cleveland show a willingness, when push comes to shove, to maintain small government, to protect business owners from unions, to maintain a high value of currency, to protect banks, and he's going to prove to be woefully inadequate in terms of meeting Americans where they were now at. We are now starting to see an America that wants more government help, wants more government intervention, and Cleveland is absolutely unwilling to do it. In many respects, Cleveland is the last economically conservative Democrat, and that will define his second term, no question about it. All right, we'll leave it there for next time. When we come back, we'll start to talk about the rise of the populist movement. We'll see you next time.